The crystal flutes chimed across the reception hall as my son-in-law gently tapped his glass, calling for attention. My daughter Olivia, radiant in her wedding gown, looked up at him with such adoration that my heart ached with a bittersweet joy. She deserved this happiness. After everything, she deserved this perfect day. "To my beautiful bride," said James, raising his glass. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows of the vineyard's reception hall, catching in Olivia's auburn hair she inherited from me, not her father. I promised to cherish every moment, every adventure, every ordinary Tuesday for the rest of our lives. I blinked back tears, grateful for the napkin in my lap. Across the room, my ex-husband Richard sat at table 3, his arm draped possessively around Veronica, his 29-year-old girlfriend. She wore a dress that cost more than our first car. A fact I knew because he'd put it on the joint credit card he still hadn't removed my name from. I'd spent 18 months rebuilding my life after 26 years of marriage. 18 months of therapy, of sorting through the wreckage of financial deception, of helping Olivia plan this wedding while her father played sugar daddy to a woman barely older than she was. I'd moved from our sprawling suburban house to a modest condo, taken a job I was overqualified for, and started the long climb back to stability. The speeches continued. James's best man, Olivia's maid of honor. Then Richard stood up, uninvited, commandeering the microphone with the entitled confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for his actions. "I'd like to say a few words," he announced, straightening the lapels of his custom suit. "To my beautiful daughter Olivia, you've made me the proudest father in the world today." My fingers tightened around my champagne flute. The hypocrisy burned my throat more than the alcohol. Where was this pride when he missed her college graduation because he was in Cabo? Where was this fatherly devotion when he forgot to help with tuition the semester she nearly had to drop out? "And while today is absolutely about you and James," Richard continued, his voice carrying the rehearsed sincerity I'd grown to recognize over decades of lies, "I hope you'll forgive your old man for sharing some happy news of his own." My daughter's smile froze in place. James reached for her hand under the table. "Veronica and I are engaged to be married." The room fell into a stunned silence. Then Richard pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and got down on one knee beside Veronica, who feigned surprise with all the talent of a middle school drama student. The diamond he presented was ostentatious, gaudy, and unmistakably similar to the one my grandmother had left me. The one that had mysteriously disappeared during our divorce proceedings. Olivia's face crumpled for just a moment before she reassembled it into a polite smile. In that instant, I saw every disappointment, every missed birthday, every broken promise Richard had inflicted on our daughter. I saw the little girl who used to wait by the window for her father to come home. I reached into my clutch purse and pulled out the envelope I'd received yesterday. The one I'd been agonizing over whether to open. The timing was either cosmic justice or pure coincidence. Either way, my hand was steady as I stood up. Richard was still basking in the awkward smattering of applause when I walked to the center of the room. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't planned any of it. But as I took the microphone from the startled wedding planner, I knew exactly what I was going to do. "I'd like to propose a toast as well," I said, my voice clear and calm, "to new beginnings, and to the truth finally coming to light." 6 months earlier, I'd been sorting through a box of old tax documents when I found the first discrepancy. It wasn't much, just a notation about a property I'd never heard of, a limited liability company with an unfamiliar name. After 26 years of marriage, I thought I knew every investment, every account, every financial decision we'd made together. The discovery sent me down a rabbit hole I wasn't prepared for. Each document led to another question, each question to another lie. By the time our marriage imploded when I found Richard and Veronica together in our bed, I already suspected there was far more he was hiding than just his infidelity. "Eleanor, you're being paranoid," he'd said when I confronted him about the mysterious LLC during our divorce negotiations. "That was a failed investment from years ago. It's worthless now. My lawyer Patricia wasn't convinced. Richard's hiding assets. she told me bluntly during a private meeting in her office. I've seen this before. The perfectly timed business downturn, the sudden cash flow problems right when the divorce starts. It's textbook. But how do we prove it? I asked, exhausted from months of financial and emotional gaslighting. We could hire a forensic accountant, but that's expensive. And Richard knows exactly what he's doing. He's covered his tracks well. Patricia tapped her pen against her legal pad. Without concrete evidence, the court will just split the assets he's disclosed. I left her office that day feeling defeated. The settlement was finalized soon after, leaving me with far less than I deserved after dedicating my life to our family while Richard built his real estate development company. I'd put my own career on hold, managed our home, raised our daughter, hosted countless business dinners, and played the perfect corporate wife. Now I was starting over at 53. I found work as an office manager at a local architectural firm. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd once considered architecture as a career path before meeting Richard in college. My new apartment was a third the size of our family home, but it was mine. I was rebuilding, one careful step at a time. Then came the cryptic phone call 3 months ago. Mrs. Bennett? This is Marcus Winters. I used to work in accounting at Pinnacle Development. Pinnacle was Richard's company. I didn't recognize the name. I've left the company now, Marcus continued, his voice low and hesitant. But there are some things you should know. Things that happened during your divorce. We met at a quiet coffee shop across town. Marcus was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with nervous eyes and a formal manner. I was hired right out of business school, he explained, stirring his untouched coffee. Mr. Bennett was expanding rapidly, taking on bigger projects. At first, everything seemed above board. And then, I prompted when he fell silent. Marcus glanced around before continuing. Then I was asked to create separate books. One set for taxes and business partners, another for, well, everything else. You're saying Richard was committing fraud? I'm saying there were irregularities. Significant ones. Marcus slid a USB drive across the table. I kept copies of everything. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the property transfers right before your divorce filing. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Why are you doing this? I asked, staring at the small black drive. Why help me? His eyes met mine, steadier now. My mother went through something similar. Her ex-husband hid everything, left her with nothing. She never recovered. He stood to leave. I'm moving to Seattle next week. This is the only copy I'm giving out. Do whatever you want with it or you're nothing. That's up to you. I didn't look at the files for weeks. Part of me wanted to move forward, not backward. But then Olivia called in tears because Richard had promised to pay for the wedding band she wanted, and then reneged, claiming business losses. That night, I plugged in the drive. What I found was staggering. Richard hadn't just hidden a few assets. He'd constructed an elaborate financial shell game. Properties transferred to dummy corporations. Profits funneled through offshore accounts. Deliberate devaluation of assets before the divorce, only to recover mysteriously afterward. And now, his business was in serious trouble. The house of cards was collapsing. The most recent documents showed creditors closing in, loans being called due, and desperate maneuvers to maintain the façade of success. Richard Bennett, self-proclaimed real estate mogul, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Mom, do you think I'm making a mistake? Olivia asked 3 weeks before the wedding. We were at her final dress fitting, the elegant lace gown catching the light in the boutique's mirror. With the dress? I asked, confused. It was perfect for her, with the whole wedding. She turned to face me, and I saw the uncertainty in her eyes, a eyes so like my own. Dad keeps making comments about James not being ambitious enough, or from the right background. Last week, he asked if we'd considered a prenup. I bit back my first response, which would have been uncharitable to say the least. James is one of the good ones, Liv. He loves you for exactly who you are, not what you can do for him or what you represent. I adjusted her veil. That's rare. He's a high school history teacher. Mom, not exactly Dad's idea of success. Your father's idea of success is not something I would recommend as a metric for anything in life, I said carefully, especially not for choosing a partner. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. He's bringing Veronica to the rehearsal dinner. Did I tell you? He called and said it would be awkward if his girlfriend wasn't included in the family events. My blood pressure spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. What did you tell him? I said fine. She wiped at her eyes carefully to avoid smudging her makeup. I just want the day to be perfect. No drama. I nodded, understanding completely. Then that's what we'll give you. No drama. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Patricia, my divorce attorney. The subject line read simply, "You need to see this." Attached was a notice of a pending lawsuit against Richard and Pinnacle Development from a major investor group, alleging fraud and misappropriation of funds. The damages sought were in the millions or far more than Richard could possibly pay if what Marcus had shown me was accurate. I forwarded the email to my personal account and closed my laptop, my mind racing. Richard's insistence on making his engagement announcement at Olivia's wedding made sudden, perfect sense. He wasn't just being his typical selfish self, he was leveraging our daughter's happiest day as a shield, a public relations move. Look at me, the family man starting a new chapter. He could tell potential investors or creditors. Our daughter's wedding was just another asset for him to exploit. That night, I received the formal envelope that would change everything. A notice from American Express regarding the joint platinum card Richard had never removed me from after the divorce. The one he'd been using to finance his lifestyle with Veronica. The one with the $42,000 balance that was now in collections due to 3 months of missed payments. My name was still on that account. My credit score, which I'd been carefully rebuilding, would be destroyed. Again, I called Richard immediately. "What do you want, Eleanor?" He answered, his voice dripping with impatience. "I'm in the middle of something important. I just received a collection notice for the Amex account. The joint one." I kept my voice level, professional. "You've missed 3 months of payments." There was a pause, then a dismissive laugh. "Oh, that? Don't worry about it. My business manager will take care of it tomorrow. Just a mix-up with the automatic payments. Richard, my name is on that account. This affects my credit score." I said I'll handle it. He snapped. "Honestly, Eleanor, you always blow everything out of proportion. This is exactly why things didn't work out between us. The casual rewriting of our history, as if our marriage had ended due to my personality, rather than his. Infidelity was so typical that I almost laughed. By the way," he continued, his tone suddenly falsely pleasant, "Veronica and I have some exciting news we'll be sharing at the wedding. I wanted to give you a heads up." "What news?" I asked, though I already suspected. "You'll find out with everyone else. Just wanted to make sure you're prepared." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, staring at the collection notice and thinking about the USB drive locked in my desk drawer. About the lawsuit. About the years I'd spent managing our household accounts while Richard handled the big-picture finances. About all the times he'd dismissed my concerns or questions with that same condescending tone. I thought about Olivia in her wedding dress, worried about living up to her father's warped definition of success, and I made a decision. The wedding rehearsal dinner was held at Terrace Blue, an upscale restaurant overlooking the city. Richard had insisted on hosting, a grand gesture that, like everything else he did, was more about appearance than genuine generosity. I watched him hold court at the head table, Veronica by his side in a dress clearly chosen to upstage everyone else in the room. "Eleanor." He greeted me with an air kiss when I approached to thank him for the dinner. A social nicety I performed solely for Olivia's sake. "You look rested." "Thank you for hosting this evening," I said, ignoring the backhanded compliment. "It means a lot to Olivia, of course. Nothing but the best for my little girl." He gestured expansively, as though the restaurant were a kingdom he'd conquered rather than a venue he'd booked on credit. "Though between us, I think she could have done better than a teacher. No offense to James. James is brilliant, kind, and adores our daughter," I replied evenly. I couldn't ask for more. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see how long that lasts when they're trying to live on a public school salary. Before I could respond, he was distracted by the arrival of another guest. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit who seemed vaguely familiar. Richard's face changed subtly, his practiced smile faltering for just a moment. "Marcus," he said with forced joviality. "I didn't realize you were invited." I froze at the name, turning to get a better look. It was indeed Marcus Winters, the former accountant who had given me the USB drive. He looked different, more confident, his nervous demeanor replaced with a calm assurance. "I'm James's second cousin," Marcus explained. On his mother's side, the color drained from Richard's face. "I see. Well, welcome. Excuse me, I need to check on something with the caterer." As Richard retreated, Marcus caught my eye and gave me a small nod of recognition. I hadn't known he was connected to James's family. He hadn't mentioned it during our coffee shop meeting. The coincidence was startling. Later, as guests mingled over dessert, I found myself standing next to Marcus at the bar. "This is unexpected," I said quietly. "You didn't mention you knew my son-in-law." "I didn't, not really," he admitted. "We've only met a few times at family reunions. When I saw the wedding invitation at my aunt's house and realized who Olivia was, it felt like, I don't know, fate, maybe." "Did you know this would happen when you gave me that drive?" Marcus shook his head. "No, that was before the engagement was announced. But I'm not sorry about the timing." He glanced across the room where Richard was showing something on his phone to a group of James's relatives, no doubt boasting about some business deal or acquisition. "Have you looked at everything I gave you?" "Yes," I said. "And I've done some additional research. The house of cards is collapsing, isn't it? Faster than even I realized. That investor lawsuit is just the beginning." Marcus accepted his drink from the bartender. "I heard rumors about a federal investigation before I left." I took a sharp breath. "Criminal charges? Possibly. The shell companies, the misleading of investors. It crosses several lines." He lowered his voice further. "Did you know he's trying to transfer the lakeside property to Veronica's name? The one he claimed was worthless during your divorce? The lakeside property had been our dream retirement spot. 10 acres of pristine land on Lake Geneva that Richard had insisted we sell due to business downturns right before our divorce. Apparently, instead of selling it, he'd hidden it away, and now he was trying to shield it from creditors by putting it in Veronica's name." "No, I didn't know that," I said, my anger rising. "But I'm not surprised." Across the room, Olivia laughed at something James said, her face radiant with happiness. In that moment, looking at my daughter, I realized what I needed to do. Not just for myself, but for her. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Patricia, my divorce attorney. The second was to the lead investigator named in the investor lawsuit. The third was to American Express's fraud department. Then I went to Olivia's wedding with my head held high and a sealed envelope in my purse. The ceremony was everything Olivia had dreamed of. The historic stone chapel was decorated with cascading white flowers and flickering candles. James waited at the altar, his face a picture of awe as Olivia walked down the aisle. Richard escorted her, of course. He'd insisted on that traditional father's role, though he'd been anything but a traditional father. He beamed for the photographs, the proud papa delivering his daughter to marriage. Only those of us who knew him well could see the performance behind his misty eyes. I sat in the front row, alone, but not lonely. The past 18 months had taught me the difference. When the minister asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Richard's voice boomed through the chapel. "Her mother and I do." As if he'd been there for all the scraped knees and nightmares and college applications. As if he hadn't missed her high school graduation for a golf trip to Pebble Beach. As if he deserved equal billing in the raising of our extraordinary daughter. But I said nothing. This was Olivia's day, not the time for old grievances. The vows were personal, written by James and Olivia themselves. James promised to be her anchor and her wings. Olivia promised to choose him every day in a world full of choices. Their sincerity brought genuine tears to my eyes. "Marriage is not just the union of 2 people," the minister said, but the joining of two families, two histories, two futures. I glanced at Richard, who was checking his watch. Veronica sat beside him, scrolling through her phone until he placed a hand on her arm, nodding toward the wedding photographer who was capturing candid shots of the guests. After the ceremony, during the brief interlude before the reception, I stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The venue's gardens were in full bloom, the June sunshine warming the flagstone path. Eleanor. I turned to see Richard approaching, Veronica noticeably absent for once. The ceremony was lovely, I said, defaulting to politeness. Yes, yes. He waved this away impatiently. Listen, I wanted to speak with you about something before the reception. Oh? He lowered his voice, though no one else was nearby. I know we've had our differences, but I hope you can be happy for me today. Veronica and I are getting engaged. Yes, you mentioned there would be an announcement. He looked momentarily annoyed at having his thunder stolen. It's more than that. We're starting a family. The words hit me like a physical blow. She's pregnant? 8 weeks. He had the audacity to look proud. A new chapter for me. At my age, can you believe it? I could, actually. Richard's ego had always needed constant feeding, and what better way than proving his virility with a much younger woman? But all I said was, congratulations. I'm telling you as a courtesy, he continued, misreading my calm for acceptance. So you're not blindsided during my speech. I'd hate for there to be any awkwardness. How thoughtful of you, I replied, my tone carefully neutral. Will you be moving to the lakeside property once the baby arrives? I hear it's back in your possession now. His expression flickered with surprise and something else, wariness, perhaps. How did you know about that? I make it my business to know things these days, Richard. A lesson I learned too late in our marriage. Before he could respond, the wedding planner appeared, calling guests to make their way to the reception. Richard gave me one last searching look before turning away. I remained in the garden a moment longer, considering the envelope in my purse and the bomb Richard planned to drop on our daughter's wedding day. Then I walked calmly toward the reception hall, my decision made. The vineyard's grand hall had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Crystal chandeliers hung from exposed wooden beams, casting a warm glow over tables adorned with wildflowers and vintage books. A nod to James's love of history and Olivia's work as a librarian. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of rolling vine-covered hills that stretched to the horizon. I was seated at the family table alongside Olivia's childhood nanny, who had remained close to our family and James's parents, whom I'd grown fond of during the wedding planning. Richard and Veronica were at the next table over albums, close enough for prominence but separate enough to avoid any tension. At least that had been the plan. Dinner was served, a perfectly prepared meal that I barely tasted. My mind was elsewhere, rehearsing what I would say, wondering if I was making the right choice. The weight of the envelope in my purse seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. When Richard stood to make his unexpected announcement, claiming the spotlight on Olivia's day, I watched my daughter's face crumple momentarily before she forced a smile. I watched James squeeze her hand under the table. I watched Veronica preen as Richard dropped to one knee with the ring that looked suspiciously like my grandmother's heirloom, and something inside moused something that had been bending and bending for years, finally broke. I rose from my seat, champagne flute in hand, and made my way to the center of the room. The wedding planner looked startled as I took the microphone, but she didn't stop me. Perhaps she saw something in my expression that suggested this wasn't a moment to interfere. I'd like to propose a toast as well, I said, my voice clear and calm. To new beginnings. And to the truth finally coming to light. The room quieted. Richard's smile faltered, but he raised his glass, likely assuming I was being gracious about his engagement. Richard and I were married for 26 years, I continued. Throughout those years, he handled our finances while I managed our home and raised our daughter. It was an arrangement that seemed to work, until I discovered it didn't. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Olivia looked concerned, but I gave her a reassuring smile. This wasn't going where she feared. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Richard's business success was built on deception, cooking the books, misleading investors, creating shell companies to hide assets during our divorce. I opened the envelope and removed several papers. These are court documents filed yesterday. Richard's company, Pinnacle Development, is being investigated for fraud. His assets are being frozen, and the bankruptcy proceeding begins next week. Gasps echoed around the room. Richard's face contorted with rage as he lunged toward me. But James's father and uncle, both former college football players, smoothly intercepted him. The engagement ring he just presented, I continued, appears to be my grandmother's heirloom that mysteriously disappeared during our divorce. A ring that belongs to Olivia by family tradition. The lakeside property he recently transferred to Veronica's name was hidden during our divorce proceedings and is now subject to asset seizure. And the American Express card he's been using to finance his lifestyle with Veronica? It still has my name on it, and it's been turned over to collections, which is why I've filed a fraud claim this morning. I turned to face Veronica directly. Congratulations on your engagement and your pregnancy. But you should know what you're really getting. A man who hides assets from his family, who uses people until they're no longer useful, and who is about to lose everything. The Veronica special at Tiffany's? The spa membership? The weekends in Napa? It's all built on Sandaro. And the tide just came in. Richard broke free of the men restraining him. "You vindictive bitch!" he shouted. "You've been planning this all along." "No, Richard," I replied calmly. "You planned this with every lie, every hidden account, every time you put your own interests above our family's. I'm just finally holding you accountable." I turned to Olivia and James, who were watching with identical expressions of shock. "I'm so sorry to do this at your wedding, but I couldn't let him use this your dayawa to further his deceptions. You deserve to start your marriage with truth, not more of his lies." The room erupted in chaos. Veronica was screaming at Richard. Guests were whispering furiously. Someone from the catering staff was recording everything on their phone, and then, unexpectedly, Olivia started to laugh. It began as a small giggle and grew until she was doubled over, tears streaming down her face. James looked at her with concern until she straightened, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "It's just a dad's face when you said bankruptcy proceeding." I've never seen that particular shade of purple before. Her laughter broke the tension. James began to chuckle, then his parents, then ripples of laughter spread throughout the room. Richard stormed out, dragging a shell-shocked Veronica behind him. As the door slammed behind them, the wedding DJ, sensing the moment, queued up Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive," and somehow, improbably, the wedding reception continued. The next morning, I woke to a barrage of text messages and missed calls. Richard's lawyer, Olivia, James, several mutual friends, even my former mother-in-law, who had remained surprisingly neutral during the divorce. I ignored them all and made coffee, watching the sunrise from my condo balcony. For the first time in years, I felt oddly at peace. The truth was out. The consequences would come, but at least now everyone was operating with the same set of facts. Around 10, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Olivia and James, still in their airport clothes. They'd been scheduled to leave for their honeymoon in Greece that morning. "Shouldn't you two be on a plane?" I asked, stepping back to let them in. "We rescheduled for tonight," James explained. "After everything that happened, we wanted to check on you first." "I'm fine," I assured them. "Better than fine, actually." Olivia studied my face. "You don't regret it? What you did?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret the timing. I regret that it had to happen on your wedding day. But no, I don't regret exposing the truth." She nodded slowly, then surprised me by wrapping her arms around me in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" I asked, confused. "For showing me what real strength looks like." She pulled back, her eyes shining. "All these years I thought Dad was the successful one, the one who knew how to get things done. But it was you. It was always you," James cleared his throat. "We got some news this morning." After you left the reception. Is everything all right? I asked, suddenly concerned. One of the guests works for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, Olivia explained. Apparently, they've been building a case against Dad for months. Your revelations last night, and whatever was in that envelope you brought filled in some missing pieces for them. Marcus Winters, I guessed. James nodded. My second cousin, yeah. He approached the FBI 6 months ago with suspicions, but they needed more evidence. When he realized who Olivia was, he saw an opportunity to finally bring everything together. Dad's been arrested, Olivia said flatly. This morning. Fraud, tax evasion, a whole list of charges. Veronica's gone. She cleared out his condo while he was being questioned, and she took the ring. I should have felt vindication, maybe even satisfaction. Instead, I felt a complicated sorrow. Not for Richard, but for the life we'd built that had been founded on so many lies. Are you okay? I asked Olivia gently. She considered this. I'm sad for the father I thought I had. But that person never really existed, did he? He was always this con man in a designer suit. She straightened her shoulders. But I'm not letting it ruin anything else. We're still going to Greece. We're still starting our life together. And when we get back, I want to help you reclaim everything he took from you. Olivia, you don't need to, wow. Mom, she interrupted firmly. You've spent my entire life putting me first. Let me do this for you now. After they left for the airport that evening, I finally checked my voicemail. Among the messages was one from Patricia, my divorce attorney. Eleanor, it's Patricia. I've been in touch with the prosecutor's office. With Richard's assets frozen and the evidence of fraud during the divorce proceedings, we have grounds to petition for a complete renegotiation of your settlement. The lakeside property, the retirement accounts he claimed were depleted, everything. Call me when you can. Oh, and Eleanor? Nicely done. I deleted the message with a small smile. There would be time for all of that later. For now, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. For the first time in decades, I pulled up the website for the local university's architecture program. New beginnings. Indeed. 3 months after the wedding, I sat across from Richard in a prison visiting room. He'd been denied bail due to flight risk. Apparently, investigators had discovered a go bag with cash and fake passports in a storage unit registered to one of his shell companies. He looked diminished somehow. The expensive suit replaced by a beige jumpsuit, the manicured appearance grown slightly unkempt. But his eyes still held the same entitled arrogance I'd known for decades. You've ruined me, he said by way of greeting. You ruined yourself, Richard, I replied evenly. I just stopped covering for you. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. We could have worked something out. If you'd come to me privately instead of humiliating me at our daughter's wedding, like you humiliated me by announcing your engagement and pregnancy there? Or like you humiliated me by sleeping with Veronica in our bed. I kept my tone conversational, almost pleasant. Or perhaps you mean the ongoing humiliation of discovering, piece by piece, how thoroughly you'd deceived me for years. His jaw tightened. What do you want, Eleanor? Why are you here? I reached into my bag and removed a manila folder, sliding it across the table. Divorce settlement renegotiation papers. Given the evidence of fraud during our previous proceedings, the court has agreed to revisit the terms. He didn't touch the folder. And if I refuse? Then the prosecutor adds another charge to your growing list. The choice is yours. Richard's lawyer had already explained his situation in stark terms. Cooperating with me might earn him some goodwill with the court. Fighting me would only worsen his legal position. Veronica's gone, he said abruptly, changing tactics. Did you know that? Cleared out my accounts and disappeared. She's not even returning her lawyer's calls about the paternity test. I hadn't known about the paternity test, but I wasn't surprised. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it. Whatever Richard had done, an innocent child didn't deserve to be abandoned. No, you're not, he scoffed. This is exactly what you wanted. Me alone, everything taken from me. What I wanted, I said carefully, was the life we planned together, the partnership we promised each other. What I wanted was honesty, Richard. For a moment, or just a momentum. Something like regret flashed across his face. Then the mask returned. "You were always so naive about how business works, Eleanor. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to get ahead." Fraud isn't bending the rules. Hiding assets during a divorce isn't a business strategy. It's betrayal. I stood to leave. "The papers need to be signed by Friday. Your lawyer has the details." "Eleanor," he called as I turned to go. "The lakeside property. It was supposed to be for us. For our retirement." I paused, looking back at him. "I know. That's why it hurt so much when you lied about it." "What will you do with it now?" he asked. And for the first time, there was genuine curiosity in his voice rather than calculation. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But whatever I decide, it will be my choice. Not something decided for me based on lies." As I walked out of the prison, my phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Professor Zhang loved your portfolio. Dinner tonight to celebrate your acceptance to the architecture program?" I smiled, typing back a quick yes. Before sliding the phone into my pocket, I glanced at my home screen, a photo from the wedding reception, taken after Richard's dramatic exit. In it, Olivia and James were on the dance floor, laughing, surrounded by friends. I stood nearby, champagne in hand, looking not devastated but liberated. It wasn't the ending I'd expected for my life with Richard. But perhaps it was the beginning I'd always needed. 1 year later, I stood on the dock at the lakeside property, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from the cabin's chimney. The renovation was nearly complete. What had once been a modest vacation home. The retirement dream Richard and I had planned in happier days, was now transformed. I'd used my first year of architecture studies to redesign the space, combining my developing skills with the vision I'd always had, but never fully expressed. "It's beautiful." "Mom," Olivia said, joining me on the dock with 2 mugs of hot cider. "I can't believe how much you've accomplished in a year." "Sometimes I can't believe it either," I admitted, accepting the steaming mug. "From office manager to architecture student to whatever I am now, Renaissance woman," she suggested with a smile. Inside the cabin, James was setting up board games with Marcus, who had become an unexpected friend to all of us during Richard's trial. The 4 of us had fallen into a comfortable routine of weekend gatherings at the lake, a found family of sorts. "Did you hear from the lawyers today?" Olivia asked carefully. I nodded. "The plea deal is finalized. Your father gets 7 years with possibility of parole in 4. In exchange for helping the investigators track down his former business associates who were involved in the fraud." "How do you feel about it?" It was a question Olivia asked me often these days, part of our new honesty with each other. In the aftermath of Richard's arrest, we'd both realized how much we'd kept inside, trying to protect each other from difficult truths. "Relieved," I said after considering. "Not vindictive, if that's what you're wondering. I don't need him to suffer more. I just needed the truth acknowledged." Olivia nodded, understanding. "He called me yesterday. From prison. This was news." Richard had made few attempts to contact Olivia since his incarceration, perhaps out of shame or simply self-preservation. "What did he say?" I asked. He apologized. Actually apologized. Not one of those non-apologies where he blames everyone else. She stared out at the lake. "He asked if I would consider visiting sometime. I said I'd think about it. And will you?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Part of me thinks I should just close that chapter completely. But another part wants to understand," I finished for her. "I get it, Liv. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture from childhood that still warmed my heart. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found out? If he'd gotten away with everything?" "Sometimes," I acknowledged. "But then I look at where I am now, and I can't regret the path that led me here, painful as it was." The sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the water. In the fading light, I could see the reflection of the cabin's windows, warm and glowing with life. "Come on," I said, turning toward the house. "I want to show you the plans for the boathouse conversion. I'm thinking of turning it into a small architecture studio. maybe take on some client work next summer. As we walked back to the cabin, I thought about the email I'd received that morning from Veronica's lawyer. She'd resurfaced in Arizona, 7 months pregnant, claiming the baby was Richard's and seeking financial support. DNA tests were pending, but the timing aligned with their relationship. I hadn't decided yet whether to tell Olivia. There would be time for that conversation later. If the child proved to be Richard's, if Veronica pursued her claims, if the tangled legal processes resulted in any obligations that might affect our lives. For now, there was hot cider and board games and people who loved each other honestly. There were architecture plans and weekend projects and a future I was building with my own hands. There was, at long last, truth. 5 years after Richard's arrest, I stood at the podium in the university auditorium, adjusting the microphone as I prepared to address the graduating class of the architecture program. At 58, I was by far the oldest graduate, a fact that had become something of a running joke among my classmates, who had taken to calling me professor long before I'd accepted the adjunct position that would begin in the fall. Architecture, I began, is fundamentally about structure, about creating spaces that can withstand pressure, that balance form and function, that serve the needs of the people who inhabit them. From the audience, Olivia gave me an encouraging smile, her hand resting protectively over her 7 months pregnant belly. Beside her, James beamed with pride. They'd postponed starting a family until Olivia finished her doctorate in library science hour, decision Richard had criticized during one of his prison visits, but that had made perfect sense to everyone who truly knew them. But what I've learned over these past 5 years, what I suspect many of you have learned as well, is that architecture is also about adaptation, about recognizing when a structure no longer serves its purpose and having the courage to renovate or rebuild. In the back of the auditorium, I spotted a familiar figure slipping in quietly, Marcus Winters, now the CFO of a respected investment firm in Chicago, who still made time for our lake weekends whenever he could. He'd become something of a financial mentor to me as I navigated the unexpected wealth that had come from the renegotiated divorce settlement and the successful sale of several properties I'd reclaimed when I enrolled in this program 5 years ago. I was starting over after a 26-year marriage built on deception. I thought I was learning to design buildings. What I was really learning was how to redesign my life. Richard had been released on parole 8 months ago. Our contact was minimal and strictly practical, mainly discussions about his relationship with Olivia and his desire to meet his future grandchild. The man who emerged from prison was more subdued, less grandiose in his ambitions. Whether the change was genuine or merely a new performance remained to be seen. Veronica's childer, a boy named Calaba, had indeed proven to be Richard's son. After a rocky start, Richard had gradually accepted his responsibilities, sending support payments from the modest income he now earned as a consultant for a construction company, willing to give him a second chance. Veronica had remarried, and her new husband had adopted Caleb, though Richard maintained visitation rights. The structures we create, whether physical buildings or the frameworks of our lives, should be resilient. They should be honest in their materials and intentions. They should be adaptable to changing needs. And most importantly, they should be designed with integrity. Not just the structural integrity that prevents collapse, but the personal integrity that ensures what we build reflects our truest values. After the ceremony, as we gathered for photographs and celebrations, Olivia pulled me aside, her expression serious. "Dad wants to come to the baby shower next month," she said. "I told him I needed to talk to you first." 5 years ago, this request would have sent me into a spiral of anger and hurt. Today, I felt only a calm certainty about my boundaries. "It's your shower, Liv. Your baby. Your family. If you want him there, I can be civil." She studied my face. "But would it hurt you?" "Because if it would be complex," I acknowledged, "but not devastating. Not anymore. I've built a life that doesn't crumble at his presence." Olivia hugged me tightly. "You're extraordinary, Mom. You know that, right?" Later that evening, As friends and family gathered at my lakeside home for a graduation celebration, I found myself standing on the dock again, watching the sunset just as I had that day with Olivia years earlier. The boathouse had indeed become my architecture studio, where I now divided my time between teaching, small residential projects, and mentoring other women rebuilding their lives after divorce. The sound of laughter drifted from the house. Olivia and James debating baby names with Marcus, my classmates mingling with my new colleagues, different chapters of my life converging in a way I could never have imagined 6 years ago. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Congratulations on your graduation. You always were the smart one." Richard?" I read it once, acknowledged the complex emotions it stirred, then slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding. Some structures are worth renovating. Others are better left behind as you build something new. The sun touched the horizon, setting the lake ablaze with light. In that golden moment between day and night, I made a silent toast to unexpected beginnings, to hard-won wisdom, to the liberation that comes from finally living in truth. Behind me, the cabin glowed with warmth and life, a home redesigned on my own terms, filled with people who saw me clearly and loved me honestly. Ahead, the lake stretched out, reflecting both the fading light and the emerging stars, past and future, perfectly balanced at last.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.